Yu-Gi-Oh! Is a unique card game. Compared to its counterparts, such as the Pokemon TCG, Yu-Gi-Oh! Has no kind of set rotation. In Yu-Gi-Oh!, cards, and the decks built with them, stay around forever. Some decks get neutered by the Forbidden and Limited lists, while others naturally fade into the background as stronger cards are released, and some decks will never quite make it to the highest level of competitive play. However, every so often, a wave of support will release that will catapult an unsuspecting deck to the peak of the competitive game and take the community by storm. This is the story of Rikka Sunavalon, the deck that conquered Europe. There's no deck closer to my heart than Rikka Sunavalon, a deck that made me the player and person I am today. A deck that began as a collection of rarely used archetypes, and ended up the infamous European event killer we know today, thanks to the dedication of a small group of players. It wasn't until mid-2022 that Rikka Sunavalon started making waves, but it had been around for a few years already, unable to obtain any significant results. On April 3rd, 2020, Secret Sayers released in the TCG, introducing Rikka alongside the Adamancipator and Eldritch archetypes. The set debuted in the middle of the COVID-19 lockdown, where the majority of Yu-Gi-Oh! Occurred via webcam remote dueling. Eldritch and Adamancipator dominated these events. Both offered rather unique playstyles. Eldritch was a zombie-centric strategy that made use of trap monsters, something we hadn't really seen previously, whilst Adamancipator, a rock-based archetype, utilised the previously scarce excavation mechanic to great effect. Rikka, on the other hand, consisted of plant-type monsters that made use of the tribute mechanic. Unfortunately, unlike the other two, Rikka's card effects paid too much for too little advantage gained, and so it faded into obscurity. A little over a year later, in Ghosts from the Past, Sunavalon would make its way into the TCG. Rather uniquely, this archetype was centered around a single normal monster, Sunseed Genius Loci. Sunavalon's boss monsters all had 0 attack, but in return they could not be attacked. Instead, the archetype made use of cards such as Sunavalon Bloom to gain massive amounts of attack. However, just like Rikka, Sunavalon just didn't quite do enough by itself. Loci, the deck's main starter, could not generate enough advantage to compete at the top level of play on its own, and so Sunavalon joined Rikka in obscurity. Let's jump 6 months ahead. It's the 4th of November, 2021, and Plant is about to receive a huge piece of support. Sunvine's Sowing. A spell card that can be added from deck to hand by Sunavalon Dryas, as long as it's been summoned using our Sunseed Genius Loci. With Sowing in its arsenal, Sunavalon was now able to get 4 plant monsters on the field using just a single Sunseed Genius Loci. Now, Aromatherapy Jasmine had long been arguably the most powerful plant monster, but with the revelation of Sunvine's Sowing, she became all the more powerful. Jasmine is, to this day, the ultimate plant card. Costing 2 plant monsters to summon, Jasmine can contribute any monster that it points to in order to summon any plant monster from your deck. More importantly, when her controller gains life points, Jasmine adds any plant monster from deck to hand, an effect that paired perfectly with the Sunavalon strategy. With this, the first real iteration of Sunavalon was born, the Plant Combo Pile. Some of you may be aware that in the OCG, a version of the game supported in Asia, cards come out months ahead of their eventual release in the TCG, the western regions of the game. OCG players had access to Sunvine's Sowing for quite some time, yet had done nothing of note. Why? Plants was a deck that needed discovering. Enter Alex Robertson and Jessica Robinson. That's me. We were in related Yu-Gi-Oh! Testing teams at the time, and we had a mutual interest in these plant cards. A few plant pile decks had been sporadically appearing in smaller tournaments since Sunvine's Sowing's release, but as of yet, there was little pattern in their results. At the time, everyone was preparing for National Championship season. These National Championships were the first wave of big events to come post-COVID lockdowns. Plants wasn't in the best place. Outside of the Sunavalon engine, Plants didn't have much going for it. The Rikka engine provided few good options, and limited you to only summoning plant monsters after using some of their effects. With the limited amount of strong plant cards in the format, the Rikka engine didn't make the cut. Leading up to UK Nationals that year, Alex and myself worked to build a more explosive version of plants, featuring Punk and Adventure, two of the more powerful engines of the time. The idea behind this build was to summon Wandering Griffin Rider, or Baron de Fleur, to prevent the opponent from responding to Sunavalon cards. Provided they could resolve safely, the explosive Sunavalon engine would amass tons of advantage. This wasn't an entirely new idea. Decks such as Therion Punk and Adventure Punk utilised a similar game plan, sitting for quick negate before pushing for a swing in advantage. The key advantage of the Sunavalon deck was the surprise factor. Both Alex and I piloted the deck to strong finishes at regional events leading up to this UK Nationals. Then, UK Nationals happened. For the event, Alex and myself were both on the exact same deck list. After Swiss, I was unfortunately out of the running, but Alex finished strong, with an 8-2 record and made it into the top cut of the event. Alex steamrolled through top 64, with the almost insurmountable advantage generated by this Sunavalon engine, only losing in the very finals of the national championship, after his good friend, Nick Burgess, miraculously dismantled Alex's literally full board with a single Zeus to take the title.
Activate to try and send everything on the field to the graveyard.
And there it is.
Alex gets punished.
Alex ended up placing second place at the UK National Championships. And finally, Plants had its first of many results. Until now, Rikka cards had seen no use in high-level tournament play. Despite its strong showing at UK Nationals, plant decks weren't looking to be the strongest pick going forward, but we didn't have too long to wait for the next wave of support. Introducing Power of the Elements. Released in the period between the National Championship season and the Continental Championships, Power of the Elements, or POT for short, was a game changer. It featured powerful new archetypes, which looked set to dominate the competition. Sprite and Telements were the standouts, but POT was also packed with plenty of powerful support cards for more underrepresented strategies, such as the introduction of Mathmech Circular, Exorcist Martha, and many more. However, one set of support cards was overlooked. Rikka. Remember how I mentioned the OCG get cards months before the TCG? Well, thanks to this, many TCG players look towards OCG results, despite the slight differences in format, as a guide for what decks might be strong in the coming months. And, thankfully for Plants, Tia and Sprite were dominating. This allowed the new Rikka support to slip nicely under the radar of the majority of TCG players. At this point, the plant love was starting to spread. Marcus Patel, another Disciples member, started testing plants alongside myself and Alex. This was the beginning of the infamous Plant Gang. With help of our testing partners turned new opponents, plant theory crafting was well underway. So, what changed? Well, 2 cards were released for the Rikka archetype in Power of the Elements: Rikka Konkon and Rikka Princess. Rikka Princess was the built-in protection from monster effects that plant strategies were missing, allowing the deck to play through the opponent's interruptions more efficiently, without playing additional non-plant engines as they previously had to. Rikka Konkon was the other card, and boy did it change everything. Going back to Rikka's debut in Secret Slayers, their whole gimmick was to tribute to special summon themselves, or to activate effects, and back then it was simply too cost heavy. Alongside its additional effect, allowing the player to set a Rikka spell or trap directly from the deck, Konkon was the powerhouse card Rikka so desperately needed. Aside from the consistency boost, with increased access to essential cards like Rikka Glamour, a card that can tribute in order to add up to 2 plant monsters from deck to hand, Konkon's real power came with its ability to tribute threatening monsters from the field for cost. Why was tributing for cost so important? To put it simply, it means your opponent's monsters get removed from the field before they are able to respond. Not only does tributing for cost prevent the tributed monster's effect from being used in response, it also bypasses almost all of the protection effects seen in Yu-Gi-Oh! With Concon, Rikka could now out both game-winning threats their opponent invested all their resources into, and set up a form of disruption that was near impossible to interact with, all inside of one effect. This mechanic was entirely unique to Rikka. As previously mentioned, it had been almost completely unnoticed by TCG players, and because of that, seemingly nobody at the time knew about or was prepared for such a strategy. In a game as complex as Yu-Gi-Oh!, learning to counter such a unique strategy on the fly can be really difficult. Anyway, getting back to Plant Gang. Between us, we'd reached the conclusion that combining the swarming ability of Sunavalon with the newfound interruption and protection of Rikka was a perfect combination. Throw in two of the most unfair cards of the format in Mystic Mine and Rivalry of Warlords, and you had a terrifying deck at your disposal. One weakness, however, was trap-heavy decks. While these were few and far between thanks to the prevalence of Tillerman and Sprite, they were a massive struggle for Rikka. But we'll get into that later. Testing flew by, and heading into the European Championships of 2022, Alex, Marcus and myself were on the exact same deck list. 2,078 players made their way to Antwerp, Belgium, hoping to save off waves of Tier and Sprite in order to become the next European champion, and the first in 3 years. Continental Championships are run just like National Championships and YCS events. They take place over the course of 2 days, where only the best performing players make it onto day 2, and eventually the top cut. After day 1 of Swiss, Marcus was 9-0, Alex was 8-1, and I was sitting at 7 wins, 1 draw, 1 loss. By the end of the Swiss rounds, about midday on the Sunday, Marcus was in 1st place, I was in 8th place, and Alex was sitting in 16th place. Rikka was causing a bit of a stir as players rushed to figure out what the strategy's weaknesses were. The 128 highest ranking players advanced to the top cut, where sadly I lost in the first round. Alex, however, pushed through all the way to top 32, where he faced off against the oh so feared trap deck, Altergeist. Despite beating the deck previously on stream during Swiss, this time it unfortunately took him out.
Lars, I actually want this deck to go into the finals now. Altergeist all the way along!
And he just scoops. This is over. Alex lost the game, he just scoops it.
And Marcus won.
Is XYZ, and now we enter battle phase. Is there a response? There is the handshake.
For the first time in 3 years, Europe had a champion, and he was playing a deck that most of the room likely didn't know existed before the event. Marcus had achieved a result with Rikka that many never thought was possible. Due to this being the first year of in-person events post-COVID, there was no World Championship event this year. So while Rikka missed its chance to be showcased on the world stage, it certainly wasn't the end for Rikka Sunavalon. Conquering Europe once was only just the beginning. For a long while after the European Championships, Rikka Sunavalon didn't win any larger events. Members of the Plant Gang, like Alex, were tearing up at regionals in the early stages of the competitive season. This takes us to YCS Utrecht, which took place on October the 14th through 16th of 2022. 2/3 of the original Plant Gang, myself and Marcus, had veered away from Plant for the event. This was due to the rise of Runic Sprite, a newly discovered deck that proved particularly nasty for Plant because of the deck's limited ability to interact with the quick play Runic spell cards. However, Alex, alongside YCS champion Thomas Rose, a new addition to the Plant Theory group, both took Rikka Sunavalon to Utrecht. Tom played a slightly different variant. He opted to include the Therion cards. While Therions had been played in a lot of lists prior to the release of Concon, they were much less common in Plant at this time. However, they provided much needed spell trap interaction, which was a particularly weak area for Rikka Sunavalon at the time. On top of that, there were big bodies that helped a lot in the grind game, as Rikka could struggle with damage in the late game. Therions didn't come without their drawbacks though, which came in the form of monster type. Theorion King Regulus isn't a plant. This meant that in order to make full use of the Therion engine, some awkward plays had to be made, in order to not plant lock yourself before setting up Regulus. Both Alex and Tom did a fantastic job, each piloting the deck to a top 16 finish at YCS Utrecht, and reminding everybody that Plant was as potent a force as ever. Although, at this point, it seemed to be exclusively British players topping with the deck. Rikka Sunavalon had yet to see many results outside of this group of British players. The notable exception being a top 8 finish at YCS Los Angeles with a Rikka heavy Dance Peony build. However, this style of plant deck only ever showed this one event top, and didn't really pick up in popularity afterwards. Now we hit early 2023. Tearlament format. For those who are unfamiliar, around this time, the Tearlament deck, released alongside Concon back in POT, got a huge wave of support, creating what is known as a Tier 0 format. A Tier 0 format is where no other decks are able to compete with the best deck, including our beloved plants in this case. Although I was able to top a 100-man regional during this format, nobody played the deck for YCS Leon on the weekend of the 12th of February 2023, and no Rikka decks had any major results during that format due to Tearlament's sheer dominance. On February the 23rd, 2023, Tearlament's kick loss was banned alongside other changes to the Forbidden and Limited list. Tier 0 Tearlament was gone. However, there wouldn't be another major event for another month, being the 250th YCS London, which would take place on the weekend of the 1st of April 2023. But in the meantime, Thomas Rose had made a discovery. It was a new plant combo. This new combo played all of the same cards as Rikka Sunavalon had previously. However, it used the secondary effect of Sunseed Twin, an effect that we'd never really utilised before. This new step in the Sunavalon combo allowed the deck to garner an additional free add from deck to hand of any plant monster. But Rikka Sunavalon already added loads of plant cards from deck to hand. Why did this even matter? This mattered because it allowed the player to set up the negate of Therion King Regulus without hindering any Rikka lines. Starting with Unlokai, this new combo was able to reintroduce the protection element of the old combo builds, by setting up a non-plant protection card before getting too deep into your planet resources. This allowed for safer use of the newer Rikka support, a huge innovation with the upcoming 250th YCS. In the run-up to London, I chose to play a plant list with Tom's new Therion-based combo. I was very confident in my list. For the event, Alex, alongside another plant player, David, who'd recently won a Scottish regional with a different Rikka Sunavalon build, both ended up taking the same decklist I was playing into the main event of YCS London 250th. Much like the previous 2022 European Championships, the 3 identical decklists all made it to top cut of the YCS. However, this time, all losing in the first round of top cut of the event, top 64. Aside from the implementation of the new combo, this was also the first event where a new plant card was added to the decklist, Predaplant Spider Orchid. This card would now become a side deck staple for Rikka, giving the deck an answer to pesky continuous spell and trap cards it previously couldn't deal with. Alongside this deck being a significant landmark for me personally, this 250th YCS marked the second coming of the plants, where the deck's reputation would start to come into its own. A year after the story started, we returned to the UK National Championships, this time in 2023. This new format is dominated by Kashtira, a deck which had become a staple of the meta alongside the newly supported Super Heavy Samurai and Pearly decks. The latter two decks were hand trap heavy and relied on gaining advantage off of just one card, with Super Heavy having the gimmick of using no spell and trap cards, and Pearly being almost all quick play spell cards. Rikka theory had died down a bit compared to previous events. The deck had become much less of a secret with the release of combo guides, and the secrets had just begun to spread, with Rikka Sunavalon taking 2 top cut spots at the German National Championships, and 2 at the Swiss National Championships, along with other results. For this event, myself, Thomas Rose, and David from the 250th YCS were all on plants, but with 2 slightly different approaches. Myself and David were on the same decklist again, whereas Tom was playing a reduced Rikka count and maining Therions and Cross-Out Designator, while I opted to drop Therions due to the amount of hand traps potentially in the format, but remained on Cross-Out Designator with the help of theory from other plant group members such as Alex, Tom, and Emily, one of the players who topped the aforementioned Swiss National Championships. Cross-Out Designator was a card choice that never really caught on in Rikka decklists. It's what we call a format-specific card, where it's only good for 1 or 2 events because it counters a common strategy at those events. In this case, a really high hand trap count in decks such as Super Heavy Samurai, Pearly, and the newly popularised Furniture Labyrinth deck. After day one of the event, both myself and Tom were the only undefeated players at the event, and we played in the last round of Swiss in a plant mirror match. I ended up winning, but we took up first and second place after Swiss, with David also making top cut. This was the first event I ended up having a high top cut placing myself with Rikka Sunavalon. Top 4 of this event was 3 Kashtira players and myself on Rikka. However, I ended up losing in top 4 to the eventual winner of the tournament, but in the process proving that Rikka Sunavalon would be a threat for the following 2023 European Championships, just as Marcus had shown in 2022. By the time the European Championships in 2023 rolled around a month later, the anti-Rikka propaganda was beginning to spread. Joshua Schmidt had famously lost to a Rikka Sunavalon player in the top cut of the German National Championships.
We hate plants over here.
And people were beginning to notice that Rikka Sunavalon was only really seeing results in Europe. Nevertheless, plant theory was once again in full force, and more European players than ever before were playing it. Myself, Alex, Marcus and Tom were all on similar deck lists of Rikka Sunavalon for the European Championships, and we were confident in them. This was the first time that Small World had been included in Rikka Sunavalon. Small World was another groundbreaking step for this deck, and one that would become a staple in the future. Small World is a really confusing card when you first read it, but the gist is, banish a monster from hand, and you'll get to add any monster from deck to hand with a couple of restrictions. This is known as a -1 interaction, as after Small World resolves, you end up with 1 less card than you started with. So why is this so good in Plant, and why did it become a staple? The Sunavalon cards were so explosive and gained so much advantage that starting with 1 less card in hand wasn't a big deal because you get it back and then some. This was all whilst increasing the chances of you seeing protection cards, starter cards, board breakers, or anything your heart desired. After the Swiss rounds of this event, this European Championship had the highest plant representation so far, with numerous players playing it into Top Cut. However, I was the only player on this Small World build in Top Cut. I ended up running through Top Cut, having some crazy moments on stream, such as Hoppy's Feather Duster,
Celebrating the classic. Oh, it's that fight, but there's the
No, and she shakes her hand! Jessica Robinson advances to the final with the Harpies Feather Duster 4-5!
and eventually becoming the 2023 European Champion.
Rikka back-to-back winners, and this is so wonderful for you. Congratulations. Give it up again for Jessica Robinson!
This made Rikka Sunavalon the first deck to win multiple European Championships back-to-back, helping further secure the deck's title as the European Conqueror. It's now been 5 years since we've had a non-Rikka deck win a European Championship. However, with a new standard build, more YCSs to come, and a World Championships in 2023, it was far from over for Europe's Rikka reputation. The Yu-Gi-Oh! World Championships is the pinnacle of competitive play. Most players only dream of one day being able to play in this higher caliber of event. And you guessed it, in 2023, Rikka made a huge mark for European players here too. The Yu-Gi-Oh! World Championships have a unique format, with both TCG and OCG players from across the globe in attendance. The experience players have with different decks and different playstyles can vary massively, and the unique Forbidden and Limited list reflects that. The list for the World Championships is a combination of both the TCG and OCG Forbidden and Limited lists, and due to the differing product release schedules, only uses products that have been released for at least 3 weeks in the TCG. While every deck saw some form of restriction, Rikka Sunavalon remained untouched. Yet, only 2 players played the deck, myself and Gabriel Soucy, a French player who qualified in the World's Points playoff. Both Rikka builds were completely different, and didn't follow any of the standard deck lists set by the TCG due to the alternative format, with Gabriel being on a much more compact 40 card list with Small World, and myself being on a larger 46 card list, playing more utility cards. After the 7 rounds of Swiss of the TCG World Championships in Tokyo, first and second place were both European players playing Rikka, with Gabriel Soucy in first and myself in second. Despite both losing in the first round of Top Cut and finishing 5th and 6th place respectively, the damage was done. European players had conquered yet another event with Rikka Sunavalon, just this time on the world stage. America has many more major Yu-Gi-Oh! Events than Europe, so it is surprised we've not seen as much Rikka perform well there in those regions. There's a plethora of hypothetical reasons, but that opens a whole can of worms I don't want to get into. More importantly, even post-Worlds, we see players like Marcus Patel and Alex Robertson taking Rikka to premier American events, such as YCS Cancun, and getting top out of it, on the lead up to YCS Dortmund. YCS Dortmund, I'll make it short. Plants won again, this time piloted by Julius S. This marked the first time a non-Plant Gang member from the UK had won a premier event. If it wasn't already confirmed that Europe was run by the Plants, it was after Julius capitalised on the smallest error by his opponent, summoning Zeus in defence, and he took home the win of the 2,400 player event. This list had the addition of forbidden droplets in the main deck. However, it followed a similar ideology to previous lists, such as Marcus's and Alex's list from Cancun, and the previous European Championship winning deck list. Now we get to the present day, while I'm recording this at least. There was a ban list.
Why is healer limited?
And they finally neutered the Europeans. I mean, the Plants. Personally, I think this is far from the last we're going to see of Rikka Sunavalon. Plant decks are continuing to get more support. Just like once upon a time, 2 years ago, Sowing was a support card. The deck will have its time again. And even if it doesn't, the Rikka Sunavalon legacy will live on in Yu-Gi-Oh history as the low representation deck that no one was playing and still conquered Europe. This video kind of depicts 2 years of my life in Yu-Gi-Oh, at least the last two. And I want to say thank you for all the support I've received over the last 2 years of playing this deck. And let's see how Rikka Sunavalon does in the future. But again, thank you to all YouTube members and thank you to everyone for supporting me. Hope to see you around in the next video. Remember to click the subscribe button.